The footballification of politics is such that after 4 weeks of relative misery and poor reviews, Kemi Badenoch must think that she has finally scored a goal at Westminster. The excellent LBC broadcaster James O'Brien popularized the use of footballification as a nod to the increasingly partisan, up then down, frantic pace of modern politics. Certainly, the leader of His Majesty's official opposition is being treated little better than a new head coach, who is struggling to convince after accepting an in-season assignment to take over an ailing mid-table team. Some of the better players at Conservative FC have left. Those that remain are a motley crew of youthful tyros, wannabe prima donnas, obsessed with their own reputations, and a group of hardened pros, sulking in the stands, bemoaning the state of the modern game. Labour Wanderers, the hated traditional rivals of Conservative FC, sit at the top of the league. They have had an uneven start to the new campaign, but their squad depth is so much greater than any other team. It will take probably 4 more years before Labour can be challenged. This only serves to further annoy Conservative FC fans. They have lived through the glory years of repeated success and are furious that under recent coaches, Ronnie Sunak, Bert Truss, and Big Boris, the team has sunk into mediocrity. The mood at the club reached its nadir with a derby match last July. Ronnie Sunak was accused of having coached the team to its worst defeat in 100 years. He set up his side with no defense. It was lightweight in midfield and did not know how to construct attacks. Conservative FC was flattened by their fiercest local rivals, and now fans are split into factions. Some appear to support individual players more than the team itself. Sunak was replaced soon after by a new coach with foreign roots. The season so far has been mixed. Conservative FC has drawn or lost its early matches and relied on a farmer's own goal to keep it in the top half of the table. Supporters are convinced that if Coach Badenoch could get Conservative FC to play like the teams of old and recruit players in exactly the same mold as the club's former stars, then success would be all but guaranteed. Conservative FC ultras want the club to get back to basics. First, the home theatre of dreams must become a fortress once again. There should be a massive investment in locally born players to make sure the team is well stocked with players who understand the demands of the fans. Coach Badenoch must understand the team's history and restore the culture of the club. The air of enduring crisis attracts newspaper and social media vultures. They forensically dissect the team's travails, assembling en masse at every press conference, to demand that Coach Badenoch provides a detailed roadmap of how the team will return to form. The Conservative coach pleads for time, saying the club structure is being revamped behind the scenes. The technical staff are working on new drills that will make the team more competitive. A new style of play will emerge that will win points and please both fans and media analysts alike. When pressed for specifics, the coach is vague and non-committal. This only generates even more fury. The team may have to wait 4 years before being able to compete for the title, but surely it should be ready to win the local and regional cup by next May. The media has observed Coach Badenoch during the first 2 months of the season and has seen enough. Conservative FC might be better suited to a manager, currently heading a smaller outfit, not too far away. Big Nige would sort out Conservative FC in short order. The team would be higher up the league too, with his fan-friendly approach. The media liked the cut of his jib. As a schoolboy, Nigel was in the stands, roaring on the team. As a manager, his approach to the game has none of the fashionable European sophistication, but he is the special one. His blood and thunder, Terry Butcher in a bandage patriotism, gets the players and fans going. He comes across in the media so well, schmoozing easily with fans and journalists. The sponsors love his old-school manner. Labour fans say Nigel's sheepskin coat and Jelly Deal's caricature is pure pantomime, but it earns Nigel great press. Many people see him as a Conservative FC manager in waiting. The football metaphors could go on, but let us return to the immediate fortunes of Kemi. After winning the Tory leadership, prominent voices among the nation's commentariat gave Badenoch a political honeymoon equivalent to a wet weekend in Wales. They then began the speculation about her work rate, commitment and impact, with a Guardian newspaper columnist referring to the Conservative leader as kamikaze. Had she crashed the economy? Had she sent mortgage rates skyrocketing, like former Chancellor Kemi Kwasi did at the behest of former Prime Minister Liz Truss? No, but the personal smears continued because the protracted Conservative leadership campaign had been marked by the unusual attention paid by the media to Kemi Badenoch's character. She was asked by Julia Hartley-Brewer on her Pitiful Talk channel to explain why so many in the party thought she was not good at pulling people together. Badenoch was further reproached for having a managerial style which, Hartley-Brewer suggested, was a little rough around the edges. Badenoch batted the insults away, but they continue to dog her public image and may explain her unimpressive poll ratings. So, Team Badenoch must have been whooping with delight after the midweek Prime Minister's questions. Whipser it softly, but the North West Essex MP may just have edged the war of words for the first time in her duels with Sir Keir Starmer. Badenoch appeared to have an extra spring in her step as she jousted with the Prime Minister. The Times Radio Politics podcast was not alone in appreciating Badenoch's use of the term budget to damn the government's autumn economic prescription. Badenoch's new speechwriter has added wit and punch to the Conservative leader's better lines. The McVitie's jokes last week were followed up this time around with a pearl about the country needing conviction politicians, rather than politicians with convictions. The fact that 2 of the 3 most recent Tory prime ministers had also been forced to sit on the judicial naughty step after receiving fines still couldn't drown out the laughter mixed with relief that emerged from the Tory benches. The loss of Louise Hay, the government's transport secretary, is hardly equivalent to Margaret Thatcher losing her chancellor or her deputy prime minister, but it does register as yet another PR misstep from a government which cannot catch a break. And Badenoch lost little time in pointing to the government's planned reboot, just 5 months after Labour's landslide general election victory. Yet Sir Keir Starmer had an ace of his own. He went on the offensive about the last government's record on immigration and the Conservative Party's lack of a clear line as the country's main opposition. Labour's decision to highlight immigration is both depressing and dangerous. It is not truth-telling. Rather, it is pure political cunning. Sir Keir Starmer arrived in office and within weeks was greeted by a wave of race riots, which he condemned as far-right thuggery. In red wall seats, Labour is being challenged strongly by the surging Reform Party, which understands that immigration is a proxy for race and criminality, which are political assets of great mobilizing potential. A trifecta of Tories, Reform and the media keep immigration as a pivot of the national conversation. Labour spin doctors see Reform as a party of protest. They calculate that the Faragist fan club is of greater threat to the Conservative Party. That is why Labour is ready to feed the Reform lion at loose in the Tory jungle. Sadly, this is hardly a new political strategy from a left-wing power broker. The late François Mitterrand used it to great effect when he was president of France during the 1980s. Aiming to sow discord among his political enemies, the socialist Mitterrand did much to raise up the nascent National Front's leader Jean-Marie Le Pen. Under Mitterrand, racist vitriol seeped so deep into France's body politic that it is now gangrenous. Millions of French people have been weaned on a diet of xenophobia so intense that now, some of the country's leading politicians talk openly of a coming civil war and a plot to replace French people with what is described as non-elite human capital. These are the consequences of Mitterrand's deliberate strategy. French voters have fallen increasingly under the spell of Le Pen. His unmatched credentials as the hammer of immigrants and eye for a publicity stunt helped to peel off support from the Union for a popular movement, the equivalent of the British Conservative Party. Le Pen was a fixture on French television, the dark angel of the nation's self-regarding media political class. He was thus able to use this media attention to normalize Islamophobia and anti-blackness. With the right-wing vote increasingly fractured over 3 decades, the socialists were able to stay relevant politically and even sneaked into power during a 5-year spell between 2012 and 2017, under the inept François Hollande. By 2022, the socialists and the center-right parties had imploded. The National Front, now renamed the Rassemblement National, is in power at local and regional level. Marine Le Pen, the political heir to her father, is written about in flattering terms. She scored 18% in the general election runoff against Jacques Chirac in 2002. That was a political earthquake. When she contested the second round against incumbent Emmanuel Macron some 20 years later, Marine Le Pen claimed some 46% of the vote. France is facing yet another political crisis after the Prime Minister lost a crucial vote of no confidence. The country's sense of drift is likely to continue all the way through to the next presidential election, scheduled for 2027. Emmanuel Macron is a lame duck president, and the country's hard right believes either Marine Le Pen or Jordan Bardella will contest the presidency against a centrist candidate in 3 years' time. So, Sir Keir, this is what can happen when established political parties mix immigration with fiery rhetoric and then reach for petrol and matches. The question for Kemi Badenoch is clear. Dare she show restraint on immigration? Matt Goodwin, the Tommy Robinson in a tie intellectual, and the UK hard right's rising star, certainly hopes not. But Goodwin is not convinced that Badenoch has the right stuff to listen to what he claims is the mood of the country. His latest Substack podcast trained its focus on Badenoch and then shredded her leadership of the Conservative Party. He repeated the gossip that Tory MPs are less than impressed with Badenoch's performance. And he suggested that Robert Jenrick still harbors ambitions to claim the Conservative crown. If Goodwin is right about the disquiet concerning Badenoch's leadership, then expect Tory skeptics to begin planting, early in the new year, a series of stories in the press about the gains Badenoch should be expected to make in the May local elections. These will be measured against the impact of reform at the ballot box. What is most galling for Britain's Tories is the sense that despite the worst general election performance in living memory, these should be good times for the party. Keir Starmer has terrible personal ratings and has been forced to reboot his administration. The public is discontented and the national wavelength seems fixed on the small boats crisis and nothing else. And yet, Badenoch's leadership skills are still a talking point, 5 weeks into the job. As listeners to this podcast will remember, Nigel Farage is building his political appeal on Conservative timidity. He would like nothing better than to see the May local elections become a referendum on immigration policy and the Conservative Party's future. If the Tories underperform next May, then Badenoch will carry the can. She will stand accused of having had a mealy-mouthed position on immigration which satisfies no one and which allows reform to make all the running. Many Tories are drawn to Nigel Farage's simplistic clarity that leaving the European Convention on Human Rights is the beginning of the end of mass immigration. The dormant Powellite desire for the country to return to the demography of the 1920s has been awakened, with consequences that no one can predict. Immigration hysteria is being deployed to build momentum for leaving the ECHR, just as it was crucial to the fortunes of the Brexit campaign. The City of London's financial interest in making Brexit happen was all too clear. What is less obvious are the political gains for Britain's moneyed elites in ripping up an international treaty the country helped to draft. Does the country really wish to join ranks with Russia and Belarus and dispense with long-established European safeguards governing the relationship between states and individuals? Former Home Secretary Sala Braverman is certainly in favour of junking the UK's human rights commitments and set out her position in an interview with The Spectator. She was asked why Britain had failed to deport 90% of the people whose asylum applications had been rejected by the Home Office. Hugh Fire and Brimstone and the Ghost of Enoch. I have studied this issue in depth, Braverman began somberly. The minute that the removal process begins, the government is hit by a battery of legal complaints by publicly funded lawyers, working on behalf of the illegal immigrant. Curious listeners should have expected to be told how exactly it was that a jurist working out of a high street citizens' advice bureau could run rings around His Majesty's finest legal brains. Perhaps the return orders did not comply with Britain's own laws? Perhaps the legal process had not been exhausted before the application was refused? Perhaps the rule of law, established some 1,000 years ago, remains supreme? Alas, Braverman had come to bury, not to explain. Human rights claims are very common, said Braverman. Very common is Braverman code for bogus. The people will claim to be refugees, fleeing persecution. Modern slavery could even be used as an excuse. The legislation which came out of the compassionate era of conservatism was to blame. It is now being used as a criminal charter to get illegals leave to stay. Braverman was asked for her solution to the crisis of illegal migration. Should the migrant dinghies be met by a flotilla of the Royal Marine's finest and prevented from landing anywhere along the British coastline? Should legal niceties be removed to facilitate swifter deportations? Should migrants be fired out of giant cannons stationed on the white cliffs of Dover? These are questions for another podcast. Badenoch capped a fine week by flying off to the United States, to be photographed gripping and grinning with fellow Pauls at the International Democracy Union Forum. According to Politico, the Tory leader will meet Republicans on Capitol Hill. She is unlikely to meet President-elect Donald Trump himself, though her aides are hopeful. That Team Kemi photo would be priceless and would quell party chatter about Badenoch's leadership, at least until she's over the Atlantic, heading back to Blighty. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please like, share and subscribe to our Master's Blankets, as your support really helps us to keep going. We'll be back soon with another episode. Hope you'll join us on the next one.